Patrice Brunet is in studio. Thank you for coming in.
Hi.
You're an immigration lawyer. We were just talking before this aired. And I guess my first question here is, you heard the sister-in-law say she was there legally. So she'd been in Florida. She'd been living there for a while. She's running a business out of there while waiting for her visa to be renewed. Ordinarily, that's not reason to be detained by ICE because she has done nothing wrong in this particular case. But then what happened was, the story I understand is she got into a bit of a scrap with her husband. He ended up calling the police. There was some kind of, back and forth. So now she has been charged with something. And in this case, I think she said it was a misdemeanor. And that in and of itself is reason for her to be detained by ICE?
Could be. We don't know. We don't have all the details. But when you're facing criminal charges and you're not a permanent resident or a citizen of the United States, they can detain you until they try to resolve it and find out. And you have to remember, President Trump has enunciated some targets for ICE agents. They have to detain 3,000 persons per day. So they have targets.
So you're saying they're being more vigilant now than they've ever been in the past?
I wouldn't use the word vigilant. I would use other words that are much more dangerous.
Okay.
It's not about vigilance. It's about, just, I think it was yesterday, ICE agents just went into a park in Los Angeles.
Yeah, grab a whole bunch.
And grab a whole bunch. So you have to be very careful if you're not a citizen of the United States when you are in the United States. And, I don't want to scare everybody here. This is not a situation in the U.S. where they're just going to detain everybody. But we are in a vulnerable situation when we're not Americans on American soil in these times.
So let's say you are, in fact, a Canadian. You want to go Florida, wherever else you want to go to. So you have a passport as a Canadian passport. You need to get a work permit to work in the U.S. The suggestion is maybe it's better to apply for that here before you get there and apply for it there. Is that a point?
Well, it's not.
How does it work?
It's not all work permits that can be applied at the border, but a lot of them you can apply at the border. So there are two ways that you can apply at the border if you're applying for a work, like a TN visa, for example, which is under the CUSMA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, or Canada-U.S. Mexico Agreement. You can either apply at the border, or you can apply through a processing center. But we always send our clients at the border. Now, you can either drive up to La Colle, but if you do that, you're on U.S. soil when you're applying. So if something goes wrong, they can detain you there. If you're applying at Trudeau Airport, at what we call pre-flight inspection, you are in Dorval. You're in Quebec. You're in Canada. You're not on U.S. territory. This is not an embassy. This is not. So if something goes wrong, the worst thing that can happen to you is that you do a 180 and you go back home.
To where you were.
So they can't detain you. They don't have the power to detain you.
Okay.
So that's one of the things that we advise our clients. If there's a gray area, just take a flight to the U.S. and don't apply at the border.
So when you say take a flight at the U.S., so clear U.S. customs while you're still in Montreal.
That's right.
Do whatever you have to apply to here, and if it doesn't work, at least you don't end up being detained. You can just go back home.
That's correct.
Okay. In this case that you heard now, the one that we've been describing, you also may have heard the woman saying, her sister-in-law saying, they've spent thousands to try to get something done here. Nothing seems to be working.
Yeah. I can't comment on what they've done, what they should have been doing. But clearly, she's been in the U.S. for a few years, this lady who's been detained for the past 4 months. She's been in the U.S., presumably on a valid work permit, and she was in the process of renewing it. Maybe she missed the deadline. Maybe other things happened, and that's the reason why they detained her, and there was something unclear about her status. Maybe it was about the misdemeanor charge. Maybe it was about something else.
Okay.
There's a lot of things we don't know here.
Yeah, I get it. And I asked you as well,
4 months
though,
is long.
I asked you as well, the idea that, she's been there for a couple of years. She'd applied for her visa, waiting for it to be renewed. She's been charged by someone. There's a domestic issue here, right? Her and her husband had a bit of a tiff, whatever. By virtue just of that, the fact that there's now a criminal charge against her by her husband, that's the determining factor here, because without that, nothing else would be a problem here. She's not even been found guilty of anything. She's just been charged by someone she was having, and still this is where she ended up. That seems kind of extreme.
It is. And that's how vulnerable we all are when we don't have U.S. citizenship on U.S. soil. You could be detained, and by the time you go through all the hoops, weeks, months can go by. We don't have the same in Canada. In Canada, they won't detain you for these types of things.
Okay.
But in the U.S., that's a reality today.
By the way, the rest of the story says, and we got to wrap up, but it says at least 50 Canadians have been detained by us. You've heard other stories like this.
Well, those stories have been reported in the media over the past few months. Now, to put that in context, I think it's the Canadian Embassy in the U.S. that stated that about 50 Canadians is not something that is unusual year on year. But of course, under this U.S. administration's policies, these problems come to light a lot more than they used to in the past. Now, out of those 50, there's one that was reported last week who had criminal records and who is dealing drugs. So that's, those are separate issues.
I guess the advice here is from an immigration lawyer, just be careful, be extra careful, because these kinds of things not could happen. They are happening. Yeah.
When my clients ask me about these things and, these stories come up and they cross a border and they apply for work permits and they ask me for my advice, and I say, you can keep going to the U.S., but always be extremely respectful with the immigration officers. Don't have an attitude. You don't have the right to enter the U.S. It's a privilege. You have to check all the boxes for them to admit you, and just be respectful. And if the agent doesn't want you to get to the U.S. to enter their country, then just say, thank you, officer, go back home. All right. Yeah.
We'll leave it at that. Patrice Brunet, thank you so much for coming in.